In my opinion, a good character needs to be relatable. Now, I'm not saying you should relate to all good characters or that all good characters are relatable, but in general, I think if you are creating a show or a movie or any story in general, and you have like, let's say, five main characters, five characters that are, always there, at least one of like all those five characters could probably cover five types of personalities, five types of people, so that when a person is reading that story, they can relate to at least one of or two of those characters, and in turn make them more attached to the story and make the story better. Now, personally, right now I'm watching House MD, right? And I'm binge watching the show as I always do, and I have found House character to be incredibly relatable. Now, usually, people wouldn't find him relatable, more or less just funny, right? Just an interesting guy, stuff like that. But I find him incredibly relatable. I'm gonna maybe talk about that later, but more about the TV show, now. Um, but he's not the only character. There are like five more characters. There's Wilson, right? There's Cuddy, and there's the three doctors, right? And if a person is watching the show, they can relate to one of these six characters, right? And what I also noticed is that six of these characters, House, I already said all of this, each of them have their unique type of personality. One is a manager. Then there's like three workers, but they have unique kind of personalities, unique character traits, stuff like that. Then there's House, who's also kind of manager, but not really. He's just kind of the cool uncle, I guess. And then there's the kind of third party Wilson, who's just like the got it all together guy. He's like always smiling in his coat, like oh, he's the consultant, I would say. But it's just a wide kind of variety of characters that if you throw these characters at people, usually most people would find one of them relatable, in turn making them attached to the story a little bit more. Now, why would a relatable character be kind of necessary? Why do we need relatable characters? And in my opinion, we need relatable characters because humans love parasocial relationships. Parasocial relationships are relationships that are not really relationships. It's usually between a viewer and a presenter. Like for example, streamers have parasocial relationships with their audience. Or rather, the opposite audience is a parasocial relationship with the content creator. And I think that parasocial relationships are just necessary. So you need kind of characters that a person, the viewer, can kind of envision speaking to, right? It can or kind of speak the same language, and in turn, create this kind of attachment to this character. And that's what makes a character great. And that's why shows need great characters, because characters are what makes the show great. Not all, not the only thing, but in general. By the way, guys, if you're enjoying the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Now, why do I find House relatable? For me personally, I find him relatable just because of his approach to life, right? I find his kind of thought process, similar to mine. His humor, very, very similar. Obviously, he's also a bit of an idol, I would say, right? I mean, he is incredibly intelligent, and that's just something anybody would want to be, is to just simply be the guy that seems to put no effort into things, but still be incredibly talented, successful, stuff like that. And he just kind of nails that balance. He's just intelligent, but also humorous, right? And also kind of irresponsible, but irresponsible in a good way, right? I mean, he's not irresponsible. He never does. His actions never lead to like any like bad things. I would guess never like kills a patient because of his arrogance or something like that. I mean, maybe on occasion that has happened. There was this one episode recently, but not really. Essentially, relatable characters create emotional engagement, right? You know, you see yourself in a character, and whether through their struggles, your personality, and you're immediately like more likely to care about what happens to them, right? And you immediately care more about the show, and that also creates kind of immersion, right? Increased immersion, right? because a relatable character creates some solid ground in the story. It's not like sci-fi. If you're watching sci-fi or fantasy, for example, it's all like Zuzu, right? It's all like imaginary. But if you have a relatable character or create a character that feels real, immediately that creates it immerses yourself and it also grounds yourself, right? It grounds the viewer, right? And it creates an incredible storytelling impact, right? When you're watching a show and there's a relatable character, it immediately kind of changes how you look at the story. It immediately makes you like experience it more. Like if something happens to that character, then you immediately like feel more emotional towards that character, right? I mean, for example, when I was watching House, and House was, spoiler alert, almost going to jail. I was like, oh, like really stressed out about it, right? I mean, I was like, oh no, like I care about this guy, um, and that also kind of allows for reflection and understanding because relatable characters help us explore our own thoughts and values and seeing how someone else deals with fear or loss, injustice, or stuff like that can help us process things ourselves. For example, something bad happens to a character in the show, and that immediately kind of makes us feel better about ourselves when that kind of stuff happens to us. So essentially relatable characters not only help the story, but they also help us emotionally. And I'm speaking from experience. Like, how many times have I been watching a movie or reading a book or a show, and I have seen, read, engage with a character that's, like me, that's relatable, and that character goes through something that I have either gone through or, will go through, or I am in fear of going through. And, they go through it and, everything's fine, right? And that's kind of the thing that really makes relatable characters important, not only to the development of the story, but also the development of the viewer, right? I mean, there's a reason why people like reading books. It's because when you're reading a book, you're kind of experiencing a story and you're learning. You're learning from the other people's mistakes, and you have a relatable character that you care more about. Their mistakes, their decisions are much more impactful towards you, right? And it's also not always about liking the character, right? I mean, a relatable character can be somebody you dislike. Like, for example, there's, a lot of people love Thanos, even though Thanos was not necessarily the most likable character. He was the villain, but he was very understandable and he was very relatable. He was the guy, like what he said made sense, and what he did also kind of made sense. But he was the villain, right? He wasn't necessarily the most likable guy, but he was definitely a relatable guy, right? I think what was relatable about him were some of our human, as humans, our worst kind of things, right? Our worst character traits, right? So not every character needs to be relatable, as I said. I think there should be just a wide variety of characters, and those characters need to have that relatability factor built into them, right? And I think because humans are a diverse species, we're not like all the same. That's why we need a diverse set of characters because so each one of us can kind of find a relatable person. And for example, I have found what kind of characters I relate to the most, right? In shows, for example, in The Big Bang Theory, guess who my most relatable character is? Sheldon Cooper. I mean, can you imagine Sheldon Cooper, Doctor House, pretty much the same guy, no? I mean, if you think about it, or in The Lord of the Rings, most relatable character Gandalf, stuff like that. So, essentially we can also learn more about ourselves based on relatable characters and characters in general, right? Whenever you're experiencing a story, it really makes you learn a lot more about yourself because you immediately think, oh, what would I do in that situation? How would I react? If do I want to be in this situation? And that's kind of what advances the brain, It's what kind of makes us better as humans. So that's kind of my thoughts on why characters need to be relatable. Also, why I find Doctor House to be relatable, not the other guys. And if you enjoyed, leave a like. If you did not enjoy, then leave a dislike. And if you liked my content, please subscribe. And goodbye. See you next time.